and welcome to another video. So today I am here to bring you all the books I read in spring of 2020. So this is a reading wrap up, and after this spring I think I will transition to trying to do this monthly. I wasn't reading enough to justify a monthly video. However, as you will see, there was quite a lot of reading that happened in the spring, and I don't anticipate that slowing down in the summer. Maybe in the fall I'll return to these quarterly wrap-ups, but there's a lot that happened in the spring. Starting with the month of March, the first thing that I finished was Lady Midnight by Cassandra Clare. This is the first book in the Dark Artifices series, and this was my second time reading it. So the Dark Artifices is a series that comes after Cassandra Clare's Mortal Instrument series. It does take place within her Shadowhunters world. And I read it for the first time my freshman year of college, shortly after it came out, and then never continued the series. So sometime in February, I decided to start the series again because Chain of Gold was coming out. It had been a very long time since I was involved in the Shadowhunter fandom, but I decided that I wanted to catch up. So I started this in February, didn't really make a ton of progress, and then spring break in March, when things started getting very crazy with the virus, I was doing a ton of reading and picked up Lady Midnight again and finally finished it in March. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. That is 1 star less than the first time I rated it. So I originally rated it a 5 out of 5 stars. This time I rated it 4 out of 5. I found myself struggling to really get into much of the book. There's a good half of it where I wasn't really connecting with the characters, but overall, very solid. And I think the series gets better. So that is Lady Midnight by Cassandra Clare. The next book I finished in the month of March is The Shadows Between Us by Tricia Levenseller. This is the Fairy Loot edition of the book. It is purple, whereas the original cover is red. And I did annotate it because I thought that would be fun. I was practicing annotating with flags when I read this book, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. No, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It's pretty generous. This is a book about a girl who plans to woo the king so that she can marry him and then kill him and take over his kingdom. This is technically a fantasy because the king is a demon king, so he can turn into shadows. The mechanisms behind that are not clear at all. Wow, the magic doesn't make any sense in this book. It's just something that happens in his blood, and yet no one else in the world has magic. So it's just the royal family and just the demon king. It's pretty short. The demon king was interesting. The main protagonist character, narrator person, she was not very interesting at all. I don't know, she was portrayed and spoken of, especially in the synopsis, as being this really tough, kind of morally gray character, and then when it came down to it, she wasn't that interesting. She didn't have any skills. So something that I really like in a protagonist, if they are going to be considered tough and morally gray and things like that, is if they are also very skilled at something. For example, Helena in the Throne of Glass series is meant to be this really tough assassin, and she's an assassin, so she's killed people, and yet you are invested in her story and rooting for her because she's also very skilled at what she does, and she is a very strong character. But I did not feel that same strength of character in the narrator for The Shadows Between Us. The next book I finished in the month of March is called The Shadow of What Was Lost by James Islington. I will put a picture up here because it is an ebook, so I do not have the physical copy. This is the first book that I read with my boyfriend, and it was so good. So good. It surrounds the story of a boy named Damien. At the start of the series, he's 17. He's getting ready to take these tests that all the people in this world called Gifted take to kind of prove that they know how to use their power and they aren't dangerous. And Gifted are people who can channel this reserve of power within themselves and manifest it into various things in the world. And at the very beginning, Davian is very nervous for his exams because he has had a very hard time channeling his reserve and actually using any of his power. And that is very dangerous because those who do not pass their exams get their powers stripped away from them, essentially. And so we are just following his story, and we are figuring out what's going on with him and this world. And it is so good. I just feel like it was so cleverly written. Like, there are so many threads that you're following as you continue the series, and by the end of it, they are all wrapped up, which I thought was pretty impressive. I love the series. I'm probably going to reread it before the end of the year, and then again next year, and always and forever, because it was so good. So, The Shadow of What Was Lost by James Islington. 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I completed in the month of March was Ruby Red by Kirsten Gear. And this is a book about a girl who is in a family that has a time-traveling gene in it. So every so often, someone in the family can time travel. And in order for them to time travel safely, they have to be trained and taught a lot of history and things like that, so they know when to recognize what times they might appear in, as well as get their blood registered in something called a coronagraph that helps control their time jumps. And in this book, this girl's cousin has been trained all her life to do it because it is believed that she's most likely to be the one who will have the time-traveling gene, because there are prophecies that say when the people who have the gene are supposed to be alive and when they're supposed to be born, and she was born on this day. So everyone that is training the cousin, they think that's what's going to happen, and then other stuff happens. So I've only read the first book. I read this book because I read it for the first time in high school and I really enjoyed it. It didn't stand the test of time. It's not great. I don't know why I thought it was so good when I read it the first time. I did rate it 3 out of 5 stars. I found the narration to just be very simplistic, and that was kind of irritating because I'm pretty sure this is a YA novel, but it was really written in a format that's like middle grade or younger. Some of the dialogue, even though some of the plot was not. So like the plot was young adult, but the writing was like middle grade or lower. So I did not enjoy the writing style of this at all. I'm still fairly interested in the plot. I do have the other 2 books. I will probably continue the series at some point, but I was kind of disappointed with this at the time, so I just stopped for now, but that's Ruby Red. The next and final book that I completed in the month of March is Tiana by Guy Gabriel Kay. This is a book that I also tried to annotate, but my annotations got weird because I had the hardest time finishing this book. I started it in February, I finished it in March, and I had to just sit down and power through parts of it. It was so hard. It is known for being a very classic, very good fantasy. I'm sure it's well written. It's just... I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. There are things about it that just made it very hard for me to read. It is the story of a people who, in the past, a generation before this book occurs, 2 wizards kind of fought, and at the end of it all, one of them puts a spell on the land of Tiana so that nobody can remember the nation's name. They become ruled under the person who won the duel, and then they are just this new country, and the name Tiana is wiped out. People cannot say it, people cannot remember it, people cannot talk about the country, and the only people who remember it are the people who were alive at the time that this happened. And as those people age and die and a new generation comes in that they cannot teach the name of Tiana, the country's name is dying out. I don't know. It was an interesting book. This is a book that had very heavy themes of things like nationalism, patriotism, honor, legacy, things like that. And those are themes that I just do not empathize with very easily. So these people are out there fighting for a name, and the country's there, and the ruler is questionable. That's true. Like, I get the rebellion kind of themes that are going on in here, but the focus and emphasis on the actual physical name of the country was really hard for me to wrap my head around, especially because they do things that I don't really necessarily agree with in this book as they are trying to reclaim the name. And so I had a hard time with it. There are whole chunks for which it feels like nothing is happening, and then when things are happening, it's completely glossed over. There's a whole section where people are plotting and scheming, and then all we're told about it is months later they were here, and it's like they were doing something, and then now they're doing nothing, and this is when you choose to bring me back into the story. So I did not like that. That being said, the first 100 pages were super interesting, and then the last 100 pages were super interesting. And when I talked to my boyfriend about it, because he recommended it to me, I was just like, why did you recommend this to me? And it turns out he doesn't even remember the whole middle part of the book. So he recommended it to me based on the beginning and the end, and those were good. And then he forgot the middle, and I suffered through that, and now I'm done with it. But yeah, it just wasn't for me. I'm sure objectively there are things about it that are good, otherwise it wouldn't still be so well spoken of, but it was definitely far from my style. All right, so that is everything for the month of March, a total of 5 books. Next is the month of April, where the first book I read was An Echo of Things to Come by James Islington. This is the second book in the Lycanius trilogy and follows the book The Shadow of What Was Lost. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars as well. This is my favorite book in the trilogy. I felt like we learned so much more about the world. The first book set us up with a ton of questions, and then I feel like we got a lot of them answered in the second book, and I found that very satisfying. But yeah, can't go too much into what it's about because it is a sequel, so I will leave it at that. The next book I finished in the month of April was Sword of Destiny by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is the second short story collection in the Witcher book series. So I read The Last Wish at the end of 2019, and now I've read Sword of Destiny to continue the series so that my boyfriend and I can play the Witcher video games. The video games aren't meant to require you to read the books, but they are mildly spoilery in that they happen after the books are set. So any starting sequences, any starting characters, countries, political ties, those are all things that are going to happen as the result of the initial book series. So even if you don't need this context, you'll know what characters are alive, what political ties exist, and things like that if you go playing the game first. So we want to be reading the series first. So I read Sword of Destiny. It is another short story collection, so the stories were all very independent of each other, but at the same time I really liked it. I feel like I had a better appreciation for Sword of Destiny than I did for The Last Wish, and I think that's a combination of 1, having read The Last Wish and being familiar with the writing style, 2, reading it a bit slower. I did read The Last Wish as part of a readathon, and I was chugging through it quite quickly. And 3, having seen the Witcher TV series on Netflix. So I did see that as soon as it came out, and having faces and names and pictures to put with some of the events that are happening in here really helps make it a bit more concrete and linear, even though the stories are very distinct from each other. And something I really appreciated in Sword of Destiny was the character Geralt, and getting an even firmer understanding of who he is as a Witcher, what his beliefs are, and in particular his code of witchering, if you will, like why he takes the jobs that he does, when he doesn't take the jobs that he doesn't take, and what he really believes he's fighting for. And so I really enjoyed Sword of Destiny. It does set us up for the next series, the main 5-book series. And something to note is that if you haven't seen the Witcher show yet, or you're considering the books versus the show, I think that the first season of the Witcher television show does take elements of mostly The Last Wish and also parts of Sword of Destiny. So elements from these 2 books are there, and if you are concerned about what books you should read going into the series, if you want to make sure you're reading the right books first, I think the first 2 short story collections are where to go before you watch the show. And then after that, they'll continue, but I don't think there are elements from the main 5-book series in the show yet. It's just these first 2 short story collections that the first season contains. Oh, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this book. The next book I read in the month of April was Lord of Shadows by Cassandra Clare. This is the second book in the Dark Artifices series. And it really just picks up pretty much right where the first book left off. We continue following the Blackthorn family and Emma Kirsters and all the things that they get into. Another sequel, so not much to say, that won't give away Lady Midnight, but I will say that I did thoroughly enjoy this. I enjoyed this more than the first book, so I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. And that book really set off my Shadowhunters feelings, and I was so into all things Cassandra Clare for a while and jumped straight into Queen of Air and Darkness. Also by her, the third and final book in the Dark Artifices series, and it was so good. This is like a huge book. I think I read it in 2, maybe 3 days, and it was so good. It does very clearly set you up for the next series. So some things that some people don't like about Cassandra Clare is that she has been writing for much of the past several years in the Shadowhunters universe. Just to give you some perspective, this Shadowhunters universe is planned to be a 5-series universe. Right now, she has written and completed 3 series. She's just started The Last Hours, and then there's one more, The Wicked Powers, to be published. This book series and the end of this book very much sets us up for a lot of things to happen in The Wicked Powers. And so if you are not down for that and you don't enjoy how her series interplay with each other and how long it is and how engrossed in the Shadowhunters universe all her writing is, and like you aren't willing to wait or go on to the Wicked Powers in order to get full closure for the Dark Artifices, then you might not like the ending. And I was very frustrated with the ending at first as well. However, after knowing the full scale of the Shadowhunters series and knowing the 5-series plan for it, I felt better just knowing that there is a plan. So that's why I point that out. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I think there are certain things that I didn't like. Cassandra Clare in most of her series has been doing a thing where she dips into alternate dimensions or worlds, and anytime that happens for too long, I don't know, I just don't like it. And then there's a character introduced in the very, very, very last 3 pages of this book that I'm also very unsure about. But overall, I enjoyed it. 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read in the month of March is The Light of All That Falls. This is the 3rd and final book in the Lycanius trilogy, and it was so beautiful. I don't usually read series back to back, but I was reading this series because I was reading it with my boyfriend, and this was just what we were reading. And we were reading a little bit every day, so we just went book to book to book. So good, so good. I was a little tired by this point of the world, and so it was hard for me to get into the first half or so of this book, but by the end, it was brilliant. I feel like the Lycanius trilogy got wrapped up so beautifully and so well. I don't know. I'm not the most well-versed in epic adult fantasy, but still, I loved it. So 5 out of 5 stars, The Light of All That Falls. The next book I finished was All the Stars and Teeth by Adeline Grace. I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. I was bored for most of the book. I think that by the very end, there are some slightly more interesting elements, and you learn some stuff that makes me interested in what will happen, but I was honestly surprised to learn that there would be a sequel, because when I first started reading the story, the scope that was presented definitely seemed to be something that could encompass a standalone, and then other things get set up for you. Not sure how I feel about that. Really just didn't connect with the main character very well. It follows the story of a girl named Mora, who is a princess, and she is part of the Montera family line. Every island in this world has a particular power associated with it, but the Montera line practices soul magic, and it is a very deadly form of magic that is very hard to control. So she is in training because she has to prove that she can control her power in order for her people to accept her as the true next heir to the throne. Additionally, there are stipulations in this world where, in order to prevent a monster from coming and attacking, and everyone in the world can only practice one form of magic. So that is why the magics have been separated by island, and in the background there's some unrest about that rule. There are some of the people who are not necessarily happy that that is the case. And so Amora is getting ready for her trials, and then there are some complications. And then the book happens. I feel like the characters were written in a way that made it seem like they thought they were wittier than they were. I just didn't like most of them. Towards the end, we get introduced to a mermaid character who I did enjoy. She was pretty interesting. But otherwise, I just wasn't really into this book. So 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished in the month of April was 1,000 Nights by E.K. Johnston. I gave this book 2 out of 5 stars. I was very disappointed by it, and that's not necessarily its fault, but I didn't like it. So this book is set up to be about a girl who is in a village, and in this country that she lives, there is a demon king, and he will go to a village and select a girl to marry. However, it is very often the case that the girls he marries die within a day, maybe a couple of weeks if they're lucky, and then he goes and he finds another one. So his wives never survive, and if you are selected, it's basically a death sentence. And when he comes to her village, this girl makes it such that she is chosen over her sister, who she is trying to protect. Additionally, as you go on, it's found out that she lives longer than one would expect because she starts to tell stories to the king. Now, this is a retelling of 1,000 Nights, or Arabian Nights. I can't remember exactly which what the real title is for the original story, but it's this myth that takes place with the same premise, a girl and a demon king, and she's telling him a story. And in the original story, as I'm familiar with it, the girl stays alive because every night she doesn't finish her story, and so she has to come back to the king to finish her story, and he keeps her alive for that reason. Here, we also have the added element that supposedly as she continues to tell her stories, elements of it start to become real and manifest themselves in the real world. But I just didn't see it here. I felt like I did not see any kind of storytelling at all in this book. I didn't get it. She mentions a couple of times, like 1 or 2 anecdotes about her life at home, and that's it. And it doesn't seem to make any sense to me that she's considered a storyteller because I didn't see what the story was. The magic is not very well defined or explained. I learned only after reading some reviews, because I didn't like this book and I was trying to figure out what other people did like about it. I was looking through some reviews, and it turns out, one, we don't even know the character's name. So that's an interesting twist. The narrator is never named. And I don't know, I didn't like the writing style either. It was not my thing. But I definitely went into it with some expectations that this did not meet. So it is also very, very possible that my expectations just were not fair, and like I made them up, and then this book didn't meet them, but it's not its fault for being what it is and not what I expected it to be. But at the same time, I did enjoy it, and that's what my ratings are based off of, so I did give it 2 out of 5 stars. The next and last book that I completed in the month of April is The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. This is the first book in the Wheel of Time series, and I am doing a whole video vlog series about these books with in-depth reviews, spoilers, all of that. So I won't go on about it too much, especially because I think that this series is best gone into without a ton of information. But it's a fantasy. It's a grand epic fantasy. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars because though I thought it was very good, the pacing is very slow, and that is just different from what I typically read. It made it harder to read in certain places, and it was interesting. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars just because the pacing shifted so much that I didn't have a very consistent investment in the book, but was still very good. So that is all the books I read in the month of April, for a grand total of 8 books. In the month of May, the first book that I finished was Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. So this is well, right now it's a standalone novel. I think there's going to be a sequel eventually. And this is a book that takes place still in Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. So the Cosmere is his grand universe from which, at its origin, there was this event where shards of magic were flown out into the universe, and in different worlds, different shards have appeared, and the effects of those shards manifest themselves into different kinds of magic systems. And then from those magic systems develop different kinds of societies. And this is one such magic system and society. It is a color-based magic system, so people who are able to use this magic can take energy from the color in objects around them. Those colors lose life and are turned gray, and then they are able to then use the energy from that color to give other objects life and make them do things. And in this book we have two nations, Haladrin and Idris, and we have a princess of Haladrin, I believe, I get the countries mixed up, who is promised to marry the god king in Idris. And so she gets sent off over there, and it's pretty unclear what's going to happen to her. Many people think that she's being sent to her death. The two countries have very, very different belief systems in the use of the magic that is founded in religion. So one of them is very, very modest, finds the use of color just to wear it and to be any form of standing out and bringing attention to yourself to be very, very sinful and not decent. And then for the use of the magic system and to manipulate color for your own purposes to be especially sinful. Whereas this other nation that she's going to is quite the opposite. They relish in the ability to use the magic, they relish the ability to wear color, and it is very much tied into their society. And the more color you can wield, the more of an influential figure you are in the world. So that's this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and that's just because I thought that this book was very, very, very slow. There is a lot of effort put into building the world, but I also feel like that effort is very, very slow. And at the same time, because so much effort is being put into building the surrounding world, not as much time is spent on the plot or moving it forward. Throughout the book, you get a lot of like little bits of information that really just give you a lot of questions that you're trying to hold on to until the very end. And at the very end, it's very satisfying because you get many answers and a lot of things happen at once in the final climax. But I spent so long so confused that I ultimately got bored before I got to the ending, and so it made it very hard for me to finish this book. So 4 out of 5 stars, lots of promise, but definitely very slow. The next book I read in the month of May was Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. This is the first book in the Throne of Glass series, and it follows an assassin named Kalina Sardathian, who is a slave in these mines at the very beginning because she was captured and charged for her assassin crimes. But she gets rescued by the crown prince because she is put forth into a competition as his representative to become the king's champion and personal assassin. And this book follows that competition and the events in her story as she struggles to win so that she doesn't have to return to those slave camps, because she does ultimately have an agreement brokered with the king where if she manages to win, then her contract of working with him is 4 or 5 years, and then she's free. So this story is really about her fighting to survive and be free and then maintain that freedom. There's a bit of romance in here. There is not as much fighting as I would have enjoyed. Like, Kalina has this very strong reputation of being the most fearsome assassin, and then I feel like not as much attention is put towards showing us those skills of hers. So I would have loved to see her shining more at the forefront as this very strong fighter, and that is not really what we see here. This was the second time I read the series. I was more disappointed with it the first time. The second time I read it, knowing what it was actually about, I did very much enjoy it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Not amazing, but like very enjoyable. I very much enjoyed reading it. It's not, I wouldn't call this particular book a masterpiece, but I did find it very enjoyable. The next book I finished in the month of May was The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan. This is the second book in the Wheel of Time series, another book that I have a full vlog video already posted for, so definitely check that out, look it up if you want to know more about it, but I will not be speaking about it further in order to avoid spoilers. I did give this book 4 out of 5 stars for the same reason as the first one. Very slow in the middle, like the middles drag, but the endings and the beginnings and the overall content is very interesting and very intriguing. So 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I finished in the month of May was Ghosts of the Shadow Market by Cassandra, Clare, and Others. And I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. It is a short story collection that follows brother Zachariah as he travels through various shadow markets to learn some stuff. I don't want to get too spoilery. It does very heavily play on characters from the Infernal Devices, as well as some things that happen in the Dark Artifices. So I do not want to give too much away, but we follow him through these markets as he learns some stuff. You get some setup for both Chain of Gold and The Wicked Powers. A little bit of setup for both of those series. And I enjoyed it. I was kind of bored in certain parts. You get your first introduction to the Chain of Gold characters in this book, and I am struggling through Chain of Gold right now. I don't like most of them. So that introduction and any short story with them, I also wasn't the biggest fan of. I very, very much enjoyed the last short story. And yeah, it was pretty good. It was fun, but also some places were better than others. But I enjoyed it. The next book that I finished in the month of May was The Dragon Reborn by Robert Jordan. This is the 3rd book in the Wheel of Time series, and as I've said for the other 2, I won't go too far into detail with this. I did give it 4 out of 5 stars. I don't know how to rate these books. I feel like I'm getting such a small piece of the story for each one because it's a 14-book series that it's very hard to rate them. And by necessary ratings of them and enjoyment of each individual book, I feel like it doesn't really reflect the grand arc of the story overall, or even how I would summarize the books together, like the first 3 books as a whole versus each individual book in the series. I feel like this is a series where the sum of the whole is greater than each of its component parts, that kind of thing. And then the last book that I read in the month of May was Crown of Midnight by Sarah J. Maas. This is the 2nd book in the Throne of Glass series, and I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. So I don't know, I really enjoyed this book. I was very surprised by it. I feel like it went in directions I was not expecting it to, and the stakes rose, which I was very impressed by and I very much appreciated, whereas the first Throne of Glass series really felt like some weird Hunger Games Divergent kind of copycat thing. This was very good. I loved the relationship development in it. It got dark. Like, some crazy things happened and you have to watch the characters deal with those crazy things. And at the very end, like, more stuff set up to happen, and I'm very excited to see what will happen in the next book. And I was just very pleasantly surprised by this, and it kept me going and kept me invested almost the whole way through. So I was very much a fan. And so that's a final total of 6 books in the month of May. My total books read for spring 2020 is 19 books total. My overall goal for the year is 49 books, I believe. So I am well over half of my goal at this point. And I'm well on my way to really meeting that goal. So I am very excited about that. Overall, I think it was a very good reading season. Tons of factors in that, of course, I was working way less than usual. I just had far fewer appointments and things like that with distance learning and not really going anywhere. Even things like grocery shopping. My boyfriend does the grocery shopping so that both of us don't have to be out there. And so I was just home and I did a lot of reading. I'm excited to see what comes up in the summer. I have some very fun books planned for June. You'll see that in my TBR video that goes up on Friday after this video. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!